Hey guys, welcome to the Neglected Podcast. This podcast is not to change your mind, but to invite you into somebody else's narrative. This is a podcast to give a voice to the neglected. It is also an opportunity for all of us to engage.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Neglected Podcast. My name is Nick Schultz. You can hit me up at Schultzy Time. We are at For the Neglected. We are at City Church. Thank you for hosting us. Like always, Quinn is producing over there. Quinn, thanks for being here. You're the man. And my special guest today is Neil. Is it Ligon? Ligon. Okay, Ligon. I've never said your last name like out loud too much because I'm probably afraid to mess it up. So Neil Ligon. And just how we got connected, we work out in Savannah doing stuff, trying to help people. And I'll let you explain it in a little bit. But we ended up being in some meetings together at some called Bryan County Family Connections,
That's right.
where it's a group of people, a lot of them working for nonprofits or government stuff, who are just trying to help resource people in the community, whether it's through mentoring like I'm doing or helping people with housing or special needs and some of the things that you're doing. And we bonded pretty quick to just talk because we were like maybe two of the only men in the room.
I'm pretty sure we were.
It was a room of like 20 or 30 women. And, here you were over there. I was like, oh man, I need to talk to this guy. Because when you feel like you're in such a minority in that situation, you just want to talk to another man, and just got to hear your story a little bit, and that was really powerful. And with what you're doing with your life right now is really impactful. So glad you are here, and appreciate you coming to the studio today to do it, man.
Well, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man. So let's get into it, and let's start with little Neil, just growing up. Where were you from? Where'd you grow up? And give us a little history, paint us that picture of what life was like for you and where you were at.
Yeah, I was born in Texas, spent about 20 seconds there. I was born in 79 in Texas in a little town called Victoria, which is right by Houston. But my dad worked for DuPont. So we made the move up to Pennsylvania when I was about like 9 months old. Was there till I was about 5. And then we moved down to Aiken, South Carolina, where he worked at the Savannah River site. He was an accountant. By the time I was on the scene, he was an accountant. Prior to that, he had gone to school for aerospace engineering. Just didn't suit him. But the reason I was named Neil is he wanted to be an astronaut, and it was his vision is shared by me and is terrible, and so that was not in the cards. And so instead, I got the name Neil. Pretty middle class existence. As I said, Texas to Pennsylvania, and then down to Aiken, South Carolina, and I was there from age 5 till I guess 18. I just turned 18 when I went off to school, but it was pretty sheltered. I played competitive tennis. I was I got to know the little towns of South Carolina really well. It was a pretty intense academic family. I've got a brother who's a doctor, and there was always kind of the expectation that school was the most important. Grades weren't ever going to suffer no matter what else was going on. But as I said, it was very, very sheltered.
Was that like a religious sheltering, or was it just like, I'm only kind of around people that are like us? Yeah,
it was fairly homogenous in Aiken. I mean, my school, there was racial diversity. I played sports, and when I was in school, I was encountering people that looked nothing like me. But for the majority of my kind of young adulthood, as well as even high school, things tend to be a little bit more homogenous. And in addition to that, my parents, there was some protection. Like, as far as it was not a religious protection, it was more just kind of, I was aware of bad things that happened outside, but and my parents were very conscientious readers and everything else like that. But as far as actually experiencing a lot of trauma, I really avoided that for the most part. We did things like volunteer with our church soup kitchen and things like this. So I had an understanding of the fact that we had a lot of blessings, and we were very fortunate. But that sheltering, I think, was by design. I think it was because because they wanted to put me in a stable environment. I feel very fortunate that my parents had a great marriage, at least from my perspective, from what I could observe as a kid. And it was always a very stable living environment. I didn't want for anything. We weren't extravagantly wealthy, but there wasn't shortage of things. If there was something that really wanted, and it was available through hard work, and there was always some conditions to it.
Did you feel that you wanted to, or did, rebel in any way, or from like feeling sheltered after you maybe left high school, or like you just saw the world differently when you're on your own? Or?
It happened actually a little bit before that, because as I said, I grew up with a lot of protections around me, and I don't even want to guess how many hours a day I was playing tennis, but I was almost always on the road. We were in these little towns in South Carolina, so I wasn't particularly connected to my community. I had friends, but I was playing a lot of tennis tournaments in little towns like Belton, South Carolina, and Anderson, South Carolina. They're right next to each other, and some of the other smaller towns. But the moment where I confronted a different reality was I lost my father when I was 15. It was kind of out of the blue. It wasn't kind of out of the blue. He had just passed a physical, actually, where they had diagnosed him with a heart murmur, but there wasn't. It was just a heart murmur. Yeah. Now, in hindsight, did they miss something? Well, maybe. I don't know. He actually he died of sarcoidosis, which when it can either attack, it's an autoimmune disease. It can either attack your lungs or your heart. If it attacks your lungs, they see it, because when that happens, you have shortness of breath, things like this, so they take you in. When it attacks your heart, basically, it can go asymptomatic, and perhaps the arrhythmia that they detected a couple weeks before was a sign of that. But when he died, I want to say his heart was like 90% scar tissue. It was some incredible percentage. Wow. And he had just come back from a booster club event where it wasn't a booster club. He had worked the concession stand at our football game. It was in November of '94, and all of a sudden my mom came screaming down the hall and said, "Something's happened with your dad." And I ran down, and at that point he was probably already he had probably passed, but his body was still trying to breathe. And it was kind of one of these images that you have in your head, and it was also very much kind of that puncturing of the bubble, because I had seen so little trauma, and I'd been so privileged in many, many respects in my life. And so I think that the reaction to that one catalyzing event really carried over for the next, well, I would say probably the next 10 years, is my guess, is 9 or 10 years was the controlling event. Kind of, there was, because of the system that they built, the financial, even though he was a primary breadwinner, the finances didn't change. There was enough insurance and everything else like that. Well, they did change. I wasn't aware of it as a kid. My mom went into a mother hen mode and protected my brother. I've got a brother who's 2.5 years younger than me, and protected us and carried on with 2 little kids, basically a 14 and a 12-year-old, or a 15. Let's see. I guess I just turned 15 and a 12-year-old.
So take me through that that stage then of after your dad passes away tragically like that. How are you dealing with that emotionally, mentally, and what changed in you or your family that really kind of catapulted you to that next stage of your life?
I would say that I dealt with it poorly. I was very fortunate to have the role models that I had. There were other men that and families of friends that kind of stepped in and helped fill that void a little bit. But I was just, 15, I think you're already angry. And it just was a multiplier. I was so angry. I was angry at everybody. And I didn't feel like it was fair. And then there's little things that, people don't mean anything by it. But everybody else is in the same space dealing with something that was unexpected. And somebody told me after the funeral, which I basically kind of was stone-faced. I just went through the whole funeral. I just didn't want anybody around me.
Right.
And I went by myself up to a stairwell kind of after the ceremony. And somebody came up to me and said, "You're the man of the house now." At 15, having just lost your dad when you don't have, I knew about as much about being a man at 15 as probably I knew about landing on the moon. I just didn't have any context to that. I was just entering that phase where I was going to be starting to learn some of those lessons from my dad, and he was going to start opening up about stories and everything else like that. But he was still very much an enforcer. That was kind of his role, although he was very kind. Never got mad. Really smart. But that was kind of, as I said, it was the formative event of the next probably 9 years of my life. I used it as a sword, my life hasn't been all easy, because I knew that by all appearances, I had a pretty easy run of things. And I also used it as a shield. It was my excuse. Well, I wasn't doing well in this one area, and that was because nobody could understand me. I was disconnected,
So it's kind of like a victim mindset.
To some extent, it was a pawn I could use as
however
something.
you needed it. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And I don't know that I consciously did that, but it did leave me feeling. I think it moved me into kind of a more disconnected space.
Yeah. Man, that's such a crucial time too, going through puberty and teenage years, man. Like you said, you're just angry and confused and annoyed by people in general already, and to go through something like that. And so, you're moving on to 18 and, about to be a man. If, 18 makes you a man by technical age. Are you going on to college? Are you moving away? What's that time like?
I did actually. I was, I wanted a fresh start. So I basically took a compass out, and I measured 150 miles, and I kind of drew a circle and said, I don't want to go within this circle. And I looked at a number of schools. The only one that was actually inside that circle I looked at Emory. But ultimately I went to the University of Virginia, and proceeded to almost drink my way out of school because I just didn't have the maturity. It was a little big. I could disappear. But again, that's the good fortune of having good support structure. One of my really good friends to today was my roommate. He and I grew up in Aiken together. And we got, as we were departing, it was part of what made me comfortable going all the way up there for school was I knew he'd be there with me. We were roommates for 3 of our 4 years there. And the early going, he kept being like, "Man, you gotta get it. You gotta get it together. You just gotta get it together."
And what were you doing there? Were you playing tennis? Were you trying to get a certain degree? Or
I was really. I could have played tennis at some smaller schools, and I could have played tennis at. I was highly ranked, but I wasn't elite D1. And so I was looking for opportunities to walk onto a tennis team, and Virginia offered me that opportunity, but I didn't walk on there. It turns out that my body had completely broken down. I have tendonitis in both, well, at this point it's now arthritis, but back at the time I have tendonitis in both my knees, both my ankles, both my shoulders, and both my elbows. Just the wear and tear. Man. Yeah, it's bad. And so I think my body was right on the verge of breaking down anyway. So it was good that I couldn't do that. But I wanted to go to college to kind of start my next life. That was kind of how I saw it, as my next transition. And that maturity was always lagging. It was just always just a little bit behind. But as I said, like my friends luckily I had friends who were in place that could kind of help guide that process.
So what did you eventually try to do work-wise, either through college or just starting after college? What was the career path you were looking to do?
Yeah, I finally found, so I was pretty solid at math. My SAT scores, I flip-flopped, but basically I was pretty equal between math and English. But math gave me headaches. So I went to school, found the English program at Virginia, which is one of the best in the country. And I had just absolutely amazing professors and loved absolutely loved it. Now, also learned how to write a paper on basically 2-liter Mountain Dews and caffeine pills, which were semi-coherent papers, but just loved words, loved kind of hearing stories, loved the context of things. Still was, and I had a natural enough affinity for it that I could make my work habits at the time, which were still somewhat lackluster, work within the context of the English major. But I graduated with an English major, and looking at my options, it was either become a professor or go to law school. So I went to law school down at Tulane in New Orleans and got to spend 3 years down there.
Wow. And so how did that end up? Did you finish law school?
I did. I graduated from law school. I actually graduated. Well, I didn't graduate towards the top of my class because I had too much fun my last years. But my first year, I graded on the law review. Again, there's a theme here, but the maturity was lagging.
Yeah.
And I had natural aptitude with respect to the subject matter. I got an internship that the summer after my second year at Paul Hastings in Atlanta. I did well and got an offer. And there was this, so it was the summer, it had to be 2004, summer of 2004, that I was studying for the bar and took the bar, Georgia bar, and was going to start practicing in October of 2004 as a real estate attorney using, well, it was really a lending attorney using real estate as collateral.
Okay. And then, something happened very shortly after, which, we're obviously going to talk about and take us through that.
Okay. Well, one of the interesting things for me is when I'm recounting stories about my childhood and everything else like that, they are stories. My memory's fractured. And the reason for that fracturing was I had taken the bar exam. I was hanging out with my girlfriend at the time and needed to go back to Aiken to check on my mom who had pneumonia. I got a late jump on it because I was 25 and I didn't see the priority in rushing over there. But I did want to check on her, so I headed back. This was August 30th of 2004 to check on my mom. She had been released at that point. And during that drive, I did what I always did, which is I was just going to power through. I was driving from New Orleans to Aiken. I was just going to power through and drink lots of caffeine, put it on cruise control, and just go. I learned a lesson, which is you're not supposed to use cruise control in the rain. I was not fully aware of this at the time. And nobody witnessed what happened, but they found my car upside down in a ditch. And I was hanging by my seatbelt. Apparently, my car had hydroplaned down a stretch of, I think it was I-65, and rolled over 1.5 times and was upside down in a ditch. And in the rolls, I put my face through the driver's side window, come back, and I think missed my airbag and planted my face in the dash as well. So I ended up fracturing the orbital here, my jaw in 2 places, and almost bit off my tongue. And so by the time they found me, the engine was cold, according to the guy who found me. It was pouring rain. I mean, He just caught it out of the corner of his eye. When he was driving by, he was driving back from a wedding. And they rushed me to the local trauma hospital. Well, the local hospital was just the closest hospital. They gave me a 10 to 15% chance of surviving. They stabilized me enough to take me to the University of South Alabama hospital, where they upped the prognosis because it was a trauma hospital. They were a little bit more familiar with things. They did facial reconstructive surgery on me over the course of those next couple months, and I kind of started my recovery. But it was, it's all a story to me because I feel very fortunate. I don't remember.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. What is the first thing you remember after that occurred?
I can remember kind of this horror thing it's called a veil bed. And it's basically a netting. It's like a rope netting they put around your bed, because I would try to get up and walk. I couldn't support myself at the time. I had to relearn how to walk later on, and I was too weak. I lost a ton of weight. I think I got down to like 140 pounds, 135 pounds, and I stand about 6'2", and couldn't support myself, and I'd just fall. And when that would happen, there's a risk of another injury.
Mm-hmm.
And they had diagnosed me with a severe traumatic brain injury in the wreck. And so I do remember waking up with the veil bed around me, and I remember how terrifying that was, because part of the brain injury was I was hallucinating. I didn't have a concept of time. I didn't have a concept of place. I didn't understand really what had happened, and I had limited context of who was around me and what was going on.
Man, so when you are able to, I don't even know when you even feel normal, even mentally after that, but just thinking about how you felt when you lost your dad, and you said using it as a pawn to feel certain ways or think about yourself or your life, man. How are you feeling at this point when now this happens to you? And are you thankful you're alive? Are you pissed at God because now you have to go through all this? I mean, where are you at?
I think it was kind of a mix, and it depended on the day. One of the side effects of traumatic brain injury can be emotional lability, where you're kind of all over the place emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
But part of it, and so that people would tell me that, but I also thought it was kind of dismissive of the situation, because I was a healthy 25-year-old. Like, there was nothing wrong with me. There was nothing that was going to, like, I was on my way to basically kill another month. I was supposed to go out and visit my friend in Hawaii. I was killing a month before I started a really high-end job where I was going to make a lot of money, and everything was just going to kind of fall into place. And it didn't work out like that. The recovery, at first my faculties were so limited. I had a challenge kind of conceptualizing what was going on with me. My memory was bad. I couldn't remember. I would go to rehab and I'd come home. When I was doing outpatient rehab a little bit later on in the recovery, a couple of months later, my mom would ask me what I did, and I'd say I'd give her one thing. She'd be like, "Well, you were there all day. What else did you do?" And I couldn't remember anything else.
Was it short term and long term? Like, you couldn't remember things in your past as well, or childhood? Or?
Yes, I mean, it's a challenge to know what you used to know, because if you ask somebody to detail the certain days when they were 6 years old, nobody can do that, or very few people can do that. That's really conditioned if you can do that. So I don't know what remained regardless. But I definitely, the short-term memory was the biggest constraint initially. I just could not remember anything, and it slowly piecemeal started to return. But as that was occurring, that was where I finally was kind of having to process loss, because I could recognize what I wasn't remembering anymore. And that was some of the really hard times, was when I was unaware that I hadn't done just one thing. That was easier psychologically than later on when I realized I couldn't access memories. I had lost a lot of my childhood. I had lost a lot of memories of my dad, which obviously was pretty hard. And in the moment, I didn't know what the future had to hold, because they told my mom when I first stabilized, we don't know that he's ever going to be able to live independently. We don't know if he's going to be able to walk. We don't know that if he's ever going to be able to be in an adult relationship with anybody. We just don't know any of these things. It's possible that it won't happen. So
yeah, that's a lot of my kind of follow-up question of what kind of timetable could they confidently give you if they had one, or what did it end up becoming, whether it was walking or doing things on your own or just anything? I mean, can you go to the bathroom? Can you write? How long did some of those basic things take?
Yeah, it took a while. It was piecemeal. It was early on in TBI research, and so they didn't really know. And so there was a lot of definitives. They would tell us, well, if it doesn't happen within this period of time, it's not going to happen, or it's going to happen. And anybody today knows that doesn't work like that.
That's demoralizing too.
That's right. That's exactly right. Doctors are trying to provide certainty in a injury that there isn't any certainty. Yeah. Everything's individualized. The walking, I mean, my girlfriend at the time and my mom would basically carry me. I'd have them one on each shoulder, and we'd practice walking because the PTs only had so much time, and just kept pushing. And that was where that tennis training came in. I knew the difference between, I thought I knew the difference between fatigue pain and real pain. Eventually, I later on started running so much that I gave myself shin splints. So I didn't fully understand the limits, but I was able to push myself. But the trajectory, I think, was one of the most demoralizing things. Is nobody could tell me that it was going to be better. In fact, one of the things that they told me was after you get about a year out, that's going to be where you are. That's not remotely accurate, but that was what I had in my head.
Did you want help, or were you like stubborn? I only want certain people to be around, but I want to figure it all out on my own. Or were you accepting of help that you needed? Or
I do not think I was particularly accepting of help. I had an overinflated sense of what I could do independently. I was stubborn, which was good, but my processing. So I had frontal lobe injury, and so that's executive functioning. That's also impulse control. There's just lots of bad stuff that will come out of your mouth if you don't have those things in place. And I've always had a little bit of a temper, but I had just a lightning fast temper. And so I was really hard to be around. Just overall, I think that it's hard to know what I should have done. I know that it was good that I was stubborn because I wouldn't accept the fact somebody was telling me I couldn't do something. And I had a great support system around me of people that were willing to keep pushing me, willing to keep helping me, even while I was cussing them or just complaining about things and whining incessantly. But there was so much of that was out of my hands, and there was luck involved. And without that support structure, I would not have had anything resembling a recovery.
Did you view yourself as disabled, or have to come to a point where like that word entered your vernacular, or what you thought that word meant before you got hurt, or, special ability, special conditions, like all these words that when those aren't applied to you, you have a certain mindset of what they are because other people are them. And now here you are having to go through that. And how did you view that or think of yourself?
Well, it's interesting because I thought I actually got back. So I relearned how to read. First of all, my eyes stopped coordinating, so I couldn't read without a ruler because I couldn't get the image to stop swimming. I relearned how to walk, read, talk, because again, my tongue had to heal. I had broken jaw, so that had to be wired shut. I did all these things. And I was back at work part-time at a Fortune 500 level law firm by January 3rd of 2005. My wreck was August 30th of 2004.
Okay.
But of course, you can't recover from it that quickly. And so that's where the deficits started showing up. I didn't know what was going on. And every time I tried to figure out a new way forward, a new way to do things, I started to encounter those very real failures. That success that I thought was happening. We went out to dinner at Maggiano's in Atlanta right before. Delicious. Right before my first, it was I guess the Saturday before my first day, and it was a victory celebration for me. I was back in Atlanta. I was going to be able, and it all just went sideways. It was bad. And at that point, because I thought of myself as healed, because I thought it was over, and it wasn't, I think that was really where my struggle really began to present itself.
So what wasn't healed?
My brain. I still had some facial swelling, but it went down. I looked fairly normal. I've seen the doctor's bills on my plastic surgery. They spent a lot of money reconstructing my face, and so I wasn't showing scar. I got a little scar here from some glass that hit me, but most of it you can't see. And so you have to make that decision. Like I was saying, this kind of the sword and the shield with my dad's passing. You have to decide who you're going to disclose to, how you view, and when you asked about how you view yourself as having a disability. And I didn't. I said, I'm back. This was a part of my story, but I'm back. And it became pretty clear throughout this process as I was cycling through jobs. I wasn't learning. I wasn't retaining information. I couldn't do it. That there was a disconnect. But even then, I didn't consider myself to have a disability. The first time I used the word disability, I actually left the law practice. I was working at Side by Side Brain Injury Clubhouse, I'm trying to think, like we did CARF accreditation. I was helping with that. I was also helping run the units. At first I started in a part-time capacity and ended up joining up full-time with that. So I was in a help industry, but even there I didn't see it as a peer support. I saw myself as a professional. And when I was looking at positions, I moved to Savannah, or not to Savannah, I moved to Brunswick just to get out of Atlanta. And I applied there was an open executive director position at Life. And it said something on there about if you have a disability, it's a peer support model, and support people with disabilities, helping people with disabilities, supporting them in their quest to live independently. It's not exclusively, but that was one of the big prereqs. And I asked the woman who had forwarded me the job, who was the executive director at Side by Side, I said, well, is it going to be a problem that I don't have a disability? And she said, well, you're probably not going to get the job, but it's up to you. And I talked with my wife and said, I feel like a fraud. I'm going here. I'm going to say I have a disability, and I don't have a disability. And then she had my come to Jesus moment with me, and she walked me back through all the different things that I built compensation strategies around, and the things I struggled with, and the fatigue that I experienced, and all the different challenges she had witnessed and that she had watched me have to fight to overcome. And she said, do you think everybody has to do this? And I said, I don't know. She said, well, it's just something to consider. And so that was the first time, was when I was in my interview at Life, which had to be, so that would have been, so we're in 2020, so that would have been 2016, somewhere 2016.
4 years ago. Well, a couple questions before we go to where you're at now, where you're working and doing. One, obviously you met your wife, so you weren't married before, and she didn't know you pre-accident.
She did not.
So kind of ask a question about that, but you also were mentioning, jobs you couldn't do. Were you not able to do just specific jobs at certain locations like the law firm and other places, or were you literally like bouncing back and forth between jobs and couldn't do what was required, or you were frustrated and then you tried to do something else, or what was going on there?
It was, I knew law. That was the only real job. I mean, I'd gone straight through school. I didn't hold a job when I was in high school. I played tennis, which I understand the privilege that denotes, and I think it's accurate. But law was the only job I knew. So it was my first job was super intense, and I just really couldn't manage it. At that time, I probably had a short-term memory that was, I would guess, holding about 40% on the high end of the information I was supposed to retain. I couldn't capture information. So I then went to a smaller law firm. Basically, my grades were good, and I had a really nice looking resume, and I was able to ride that. So you kind of, there was a lot of associated guilt with things, because I was clearly riding the coattails of somebody I wasn't anymore. My resume reflected it, but you can't go into a job and say, well, what you see on the paper there, I'm not that anymore, because they're going to say, well, thank you very much. See yourself out. So I was interviewing using somebody else's resume is how it felt. I went to a smaller law firm, but I hadn't retained anything from my prior stop, or not much. And so what they thought they were getting and what they were getting were very different things. And I was overwhelmed, and I felt very socially isolated. I was struggling to make human connections. And kind of a lot of the issues that came out of the brain injury, significant amounts of depression, which I had always kind of danced around. They really started to manifest. Some of it was probably a result of brain injury. Some of it was a result of things not working out the way I thought they were going to, and not having particularly well-developed coping skills. So I got I had one boss tell me in my exit interview. Well, it wasn't an exit interview. It was him asking. He asked me, "Well, what exactly can you do?" It wasn't an inquiry like he wanted me to supply it. He was pointing out I could do nothing, and I obviously took that very personally. But he was right. I could not perform the job functions. I went to the next place, couldn't perform the job functions, and ended up finding my way into a document review platform where it was basically just reviewing things for privilege and responsiveness. It was more of a kind of a lower level law job, and found out I was pretty decent at it. It was boring as all get out, but that's what I wanted. I wanted stability. And I did that for basically 3 years. But there was no upside. And so that was when I finally realized that I wasn't going anywhere. I was just kind of treading water. The upside is that was where I met my wife.
Yeah.
And so I feel very fortunate about that.
Well, that's the intriguing part to me, especially just because of how difficult relationships can be, whether it's a spouse or a best friend or a parent or something like that. And here you are mentioning, you can't retain certain information, you don't remember things, you're feeling certain ways about yourself, whether it's depression or anger or frustration, have a short fuse, and just not sure. Like, I'm sure like you said, you're giving people a resume, but that's somebody else.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to live up to this life that I used to be, but I'm now in this situation. And then you meet what is going to be your wife, and I'm interested of what that was like, not only for you, but for her, and her taking on all of these things that are kind of new Neil now, and
right.
How that dynamic worked with her. Obviously worked well enough where you got married, but some of the challenges, but also the good things that came through that for you specifically. It
was, I think one of the hardest things was people who knew me before my wreck. I'm a different person than I was, and I'm a different person now because I'm a 41-year-old man instead of a 24-year-old man.
Right.
But there were also differences that were it changed me, and it changed me from a capacity perspective. It changed me from an outlook perspective and everything else like that. By the time I encountered my wife, and at the law review job, the doc review job, I was a lot more stable. At least ostensibly, I was more stable. But I was absolutely obsessed with my past because my fractured memory, I couldn't piece things together. I couldn't figure out how things fit together. It strained prior relationships. People could remember. People would tell me things. I remember this, and I wouldn't be able to remember it. And there were people that I didn't have any connection to, who had a prior knowledge of me, and that was really tough. So it was with my wife's encouragement, and she saw how much I was struggling still, it was struggling with identity, because I could have existed in that kind of document review arena probably for a while if I was still suffering from some maturity issues. But overall, I think I could have probably existed there, but it was just existence. And she was the one who talked with me and said, "Is this really what you want?" And I quit my job where I had just inherited a little bit of money, which allowed me to be able to do that. There was no long term. It was going to be a finite period of time. I quit my job, and I wrote a book. I'd always wanted to write a book. Didn't have any illusions that it was going to become a Tom Clancy bestseller. But mostly I used that opportunity to sit at home and get to know myself, and encounter the past through the eyes of others, and come to appreciate that the me of the past is dead, because these stories were stories of somebody, but they weren't from my perspective. I didn't remember them.
Was it therapeutic to write the book?
Without a doubt. It was hard. I think that it was a very lonely process. And it was hard financially, obviously, as you watch the money walk out the door and you're just sitting there and you're just trying desperately to get something onto the page that will make some sense. And it ended up being very costly as far as that, but it opened doors. I did some public speaking engagements to promote the book kind of locally.
And the book's called Detours, right?
Yes. Yeah, the Detours.
The Detours.
And then that opened up these avenues where I was able to get into side-by-side, and really start pursuing my passion, is recognizing and I was doing peer visiting in the hospitals and stuff like that. And I was starting to recognize the universal experience of loss. And that was really what my book was about for me. It was a very childish, in a lot of ways. It was written through the lens of somebody who had been pretty immature and was grappling with things he didn't understand.
Yeah.
But it was a book about loss and appreciating what was lost, but not dwelling in it, and finding a way to move on to the next step.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's so great too that, through all that loss, you gained a wife.
Yeah.
And somebody that had no idea who you were before your accident, or what you went through right after, but she chose to be with you like you chose to be with her, and she loves you for who you are now, even though you're dealing with all that loss, all that pain, all those things you don't even remember, and how you're viewing yourself. Like, you're still a woman that it's like, man, I love you and I want to be with you forever. This version of Neil, I don't have to know everything about that Neil. Like, this is the version I love. And to me, that had to be like a pretty cool thing to get somebody to live your life with that accepted you and loved you, man.
I think that most of my life I've suffered from imposter syndrome, where I'm convinced that someone's going to pull back the curtain and see that I don't know what the heck I'm talking about, and I don't know anything about what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And that was, I had that long before my wreck. Even when I was interning at Paul Hastings, I was convinced that I didn't fit in. Everybody else went to better schools, and they were going to figure that out. Well, it worked out. I suffered that even more acutely when I was post-rec, because I was convinced that I was just faking it. And it was Carrie who really was the one to remind me of successes, to keep me focused on the positive, and to reframe things. And the amount of patience she had to show. She had to go through so many phases and listen to so many stories of things that she probably didn't want to hear stories about, and work with me to kind of figure out what the new way forward was. But there was always that focus, and the fact that it was the collective pronoun of we as opposed to just me. It was really
a lot of power in that in there.
Without a doubt.
That's good. Well, let's talk about success in the form of what I think is what you're doing now, and kind of fast forward to today. And you mentioned Life and kind of what they do with people with disabilities, helping them find housing, and and like, you have a passion for it. You really do. And maybe part of it is because you identify a little bit with some of what they're going through and the struggles, but also of what you get to do for a living, and kind of describe that where you're at right now. Yeah,
I was just on a Zoom call with my coworkers this morning, and we were saying goodbye to one of our coworkers who's leaving for another opportunity with Faith Equestrian, which I'm incredibly happy for her. But I said, this is the most influential job of my life, and there's not even a close second. This has been an identity affirming position, and it's very much due to the fact that there's reciprocity. What I invest in, I get equal, if not more, out. I've learned so much about people with disabilities, about that collective wisdom, as well as the perseverance. I mean, the amount of ingenuity that I witnessed from our consumers and from my coworkers has been really amazing. We were either the second or third Center for Independent Living in Georgia. And we were started based on the need for transportation. Originally, it was a transportation initiative that got everything kind of off the ground. It's expanded. We have our 5 core services, which are information referral, independent living skills training, peer support, transition, which is both youth transition as well as nursing home transition or institutional transition and back into the community, and advocacy, which is both self and systems. And we are a planning organization. We help people who have been told in some cases that this is the best that they can have, dream big, and say, what are your goals? Not what are my goals. I'm not going to force you to have the goals that I have, but what can we do to help you achieve the goals, achieve the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve? And that's a lot of times that's finding resources, that's helping people brainstorm. And sometimes it's just having a conversation where you go, I mean, I've been in bad spots. I haven't been in the bad spot you've been in. Like, everybody's experience is unique, but there's commonalities to it. And so I think that that's one of the keys to life, is that we are an open environment that's collaborative in nature. We're non-hierarchical. We find what's going on in the community. We try to engage the people with disabilities across. We now are in 20 counties, and we see what their needs are. We provide home modifications and assistive technology, but we're also trying to get them to come to us and tell us what they're looking to do.
How can somebody get involved with what you're doing? And obviously, like a volunteer role, but providing opportunities or volunteer for what you're doing, or give an assistance to the people you're working with. Right.
Well, one of the things we are looking to build out a volunteer program. We've had one in the past. It can be challenging to manage because it's a full-time responsibility. But I would encourage you to go to our website, which is www.life.com, to check it out and see kind of all the things we do. You can also give us a call at 912-920-2414. And we can have discussions about kind of what's going on. A lot of times we're just looking for, one of the things we're looking for is we're looking for contractors to help us provide home modifications. But in addition to that, sometimes we're looking for people, donations. Sometimes we're looking for help with getting things cleaned up. We're still in the nascent stages of planning a mural project to be able to decorate the walls. Obviously, with COVID happening, that kind of put everything on hold. But that will be something that we're going to try to pick back up when we get back into the office. But I would encourage just to explore the website a little bit and reach out with questions. And if you know of anybody with a disability who's looking for support, please have them reach out to us. I've found the organization to be incredibly supportive. It's a non-judgmental environment. And there's a lot of insight that is held within those walls.
Yeah. And one of our favorite thing for me is just at the end of asking people, how they can do something personally, if they're listening to this, or in their own life. So maybe not even from the organization or volunteering for a nonprofit or, someplace like that, but based on what you have went through in life, and you've went through a lot. I mean, you were a teenager and lost your father. So, and I'm sure it's hard to remember a lot of stuff that went on there, but somebody that, whether they have a disability, that they were born with it, or they have an acquired disability, what are things that were really impactful in your life, or looking back on, man, when somebody did this, it's not this huge thing they did every single day, or like, but what can someone who hasn't experienced that do to make an impact in your life, or someone like you?
I think it's really important to be curious and to ask questions, not be afraid of asking questions, but then listen to the answers. I think a lot of people, very well-intentioned people, and I've been in this boat where you want to fix, and that's not what people are looking for. They're looking sometimes, they can tell you what they need. You just have to ask them and you have to listen. And sometimes it requires a little patience if their disability maybe is a communicative one. There's a barrier there. But engaging people as equals, I think, is essential in all of life, and I don't think that changes just because someone has a disability. They're a human being. They need their autonomy, and engage with them, ask them questions, see how they need your help, because I think that will mean a lot to people. It certainly has meant a lot to me.
Thanks, man. It's meant a lot that you've come on our podcast and shared your experience. And I think it's going to be really impactful for not only people that love or know you to hear kind of like the full story again, but also just for people who have never known you, but they might know somebody that has went through something like you did, whether it's losing a parent, losing a father, or being in a serious accident, brain injury, disability, acquired, not acquired, or just battle with depression because of how they view yourself. That's a whole nother thing as well, of just regardless if you have a disability, like viewing yourself as I can't do this or less than, or I'm this and I'll never be that. And, to see you kind of fight through your struggles and persevere to where you're at now with that purpose of helping out other people that are a lot more like you now than maybe you ever would have thought when you grew up or you went off to college and you had that dream of being a lawyer. And now who knows if you ever thought you would be doing what you're doing now, but like you said, it's so meaningful to you. Right.
It definitely wasn't where I envisioned that I would end up. And I feel very fortunate that I am where I am. I think that's been my biggest takeaway is that I didn't get to choose my story, and I feel very lucky that I didn't get to choose it. It became my story.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm fortunate. I feel fortunate that you're in our city and you're fighting for people that have special conditions and disabilities, and you're helping them have dignity and autonomy, like you're talking about, and feel like they're everybody else in part of our city and have their own place to stay in a healthy situation. So, man, I appreciate what you do. I love what you do, and I hope if somebody's listening to this and they want to get involved with it as well.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
Man, appreciate you as well. Quinn, thanks for producing. City Church, thanks for hosting, and we'll catch you all next time. Peace.